Next up in our tour of evolution is the process of speciation. So we've been talking about changes within a species. Well, speciation is the process where a species becomes a different species, or where one species splits into two or more species. So it's a much larger change. And just like all of the other evolutionary processes, this occurs at different speeds depending on how fast individuals within that species mature to reproductive age and start reproducing. Speciation is what increases the biodiversity. So there are lots of different ways that speciation can happen. One example is physical separation. So physical separation can be major geologic changes, like the formation of the Grand Canyon. When the Grand Canyon developed, the squirrels in the area ended up being separated by the canyon. It's a long way down and a long way up, and there aren't a lot of trees in between the sides of the canyon. The squirrels aren't going to be wanting to go down there very much, or maybe ground squirrels, but not these guys. These guys ended up having populations isolated from each other on either side of the Grand Canyon. And over centuries, they developed different appearances, different types of food they prefer, and some different behaviors. This is an easy thing to see and understand, a physical separation. It can also happen when a population migrates to a new area. So, for example, there are several instances where a flock of birds has been caught up in a storm system and carried to another part of the world, another island, even across the Atlantic Ocean. We've got things like cattle egrets and glossy ibis and white-faced ibis that probably came across from off the coast of Africa during hurricane season. And now they're all over the US. But you don't have to be physically separated. These two guys, for example, these are meadowlarks. And they look awfully similar. In fact, in the area where you can see both of these species, the western meadowlark and the eastern meadowlark, the only way bird watchers can tell the difference is by listening to them sing. If you just look at one, you can't tell the difference. But they have separated from each other through behavioral isolation. The mating behaviors change. So, some of the females prefer males with, for example, a loud call. They like the loud boys. Other females like a more complicated call, a more complicated song. And so the females that like the loud song, their daughters are probably going to like the loud song and their sons are going to sing loud. And so that's going to reinforce that within that part of the population. Same thing on the other side. The females that like a complicated song, their daughters are more likely to like a complicated song, and their sons are going to sing a more complicated song. And so you end up with this behavioral isolation. The western meadowlark, of course, is in the western U.S. The eastern meadowlark is in the eastern U.S., but in the middle, they can both co-occur. You can get similar kinds of a result if you have situations, for example, where some individuals learn to be very comfortable living near humans and others avoid human habitats. Or there can be what's called temporal isolation. Temporal refers to time. Think about tempo in music, comes from the same root. Some individuals breed earlier in the season. Some individuals breed later in the season. And if you lose the overlap in time, you can get isolation, reproductive isolation of those two species. Here is an example that has been observed within recorded human history, the London Underground mosquito. So the London Underground was built in the, I can't remember exactly, 1700s, I think, earlier than you would have expected. And what we think happened is that when the underground subway system was constructed, some mosquitoes got trapped inside. And nowadays, the mosquitoes that are found in the London Underground are distinctly different than those found above ground. These guys, they're more voracious biters. They bite a lot more and a lot more frequently. They are flexible about what they feed on: rats, mice, pigeons, humans. They are not tolerant of cold weather, and they breed year-round. The mosquitoes on the surface are seasonal breeders. They can deal with British winters. And if you put the London Underground mosquito and the mosquitoes from above ground together, they can mate, but their eggs don't hatch. They have become distinctly separate species due to physical isolation. Now, going the other direction, we can have something called hybridization, where two species can blend together. So if two species were physically separated but come back into contact, if they're still genetically compatible, behaviorally compatible, they might hybridize or breed with each other. Hybridization is very, very common in plants. Certain categories of plants like oak trees or these columbine flowers, it can be hard to identify them by species because they hybridize so readily. Now, hybridization does not always result in fertile offspring. And if the offspring are not fertile or have lower survival rates, that's not likely to cause those two species to blend together. And sometimes these hybrids will do something called back cross. They will breed with one of the parent species, but not the other. And that's going to increase the genetic diversity of that parent species. And it may help that parent species' survival. One of the things we're starting to see are Pisleys. Pisleys are hybrids between polar bears and grizzly bears. What are the likelihoods that this is going to survive? I don't know. Polar bears are, as we all know, in huge amounts of trouble and likely to go extinct in our lifetime. Some of their genes might survive in the grizzly bear population. Now, we can also get some seriously weird stuff going on with hybridization. What we have here are 3 species of whiptail lizards. The one in the middle reproduces asexually, without sexual reproduction. And the 2 on the outside are sexually reproducing species. So, what the heck is going on here? The one in the middle, the New Mexico whiptail lizard, is an all-female species. There are no males. They reproduce through a process called parthenogenesis. What happens is the female produces eggs, and these eggs, even though they have not been fertilized by a male, produce viable offspring. Their offspring survive, grow up, and reproduce. So the New Mexico whip-tailed lizard comes about when these 2 other species hybridize. So we've got 2 different species hybridizing to produce the New Mexico whip-tailed lizards. And each time that happens, you end up with a lineage of these all-female whip-tailed lizards. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in this group. It's been relatively well studied. So, for example, a female whiptail, New Mexico whiptail, after she lays eggs, she might start to behave like a male and breed with another New Mexico whiptail. But she's not producing any sperm. She's just going through the behaviors. Well, if you're a female and another female comes along and goes through mating behaviors, you're going to lay more eggs. So you're going to have more offspring. Pretty wild. This allows, this kind of behavior, this parthenogenesis process, can be seen in other lizards, in snakes, in a lot of fish. It occurs in invertebrates, in plants, amphibians, on rare occasions in birds, and this allows for reproduction when males are not available. Situations like a female moving into a new area. And for our go home evolution you're drunk of the day, let's talk about the hagfish. The hagfish is a very primitive type of fish. It's very simple. It doesn't even have normal jaws the way we think of jaws, with a bony mouth that can open and close. So they're soft-bodied. You would think these would be a predator's favorite prey species, except they have one of the most bizarre defense mechanisms. They produce slime. Huge amounts of slime. So you get the hagfish and it gets covered in slime. The predator who's grabbed it, now their jaw and their mouth is just full of slime, and they're going to not be able to chew. They're going to spit it out. It's going to cause some serious problems for the predators. And the hagfish ties itself into a knot and kind of slides through its own body to wipe off the slime. Really bizarre. And of course, if you have a car trunk full of hagfish, you don't want to get rear-ended because you end up with the mess there on the right.